Our next speaker is a long-term friend and supporter of defence science, and that is none other than Commodore Phil Spedding. Phil is currently Director General, Navy Plans, Systems and Infrastructure within Navy Headquarters, and he's going to come and talk to us about the relationship between Navy and defence science and technology support. Thanks, Phil.
Now, Christine described herself as a technologist. That is not something I describe myself as you can tell by my paper-based presentation rather than anything to do with gadgets and electronic systems. Look, I'd like to thank DST for the opportunity to speak this morning. For those who saw an early version of the program, I'm clearly not Rear Admiral Peter Quinn. Peter's stuck in Canberra in the depths of winter. It was -2 when I checked the forecast this morning, and he's attending some awful meeting in the Russell complex. So he sends his best wishes for the conference and his apologies he couldn't be here. As Jamie said, I've had a long association with DSTO and now DST, and I'd like to state up front my appreciation for the work that DST does. The history of my engagement's covered a number of different areas. It's covered capability development in terms of DST's support to projects when I was working in the capability development group, as it was then known. It's involved also in capability development in the current role I fill, looking at futures work, which covers such things as concept development, strategy development, and the conduct of experimentation. It's covered operational support. Back when I was a younger officer working at the fleet headquarters, we were engaged in weapon and sensor analysis and performance, and also in tactics development. And it's also covered in support of operations, provision of OA and campaign support in the various operational theatres that I've deployed. And there's an old colleague here from one of my previous deployments that I caught up with earlier on today. Now, through that journey with DSTO, I've made a lot of really good friends, and it's been lovely over the last day and a bit to catch up with a bunch of those people. Now, the downside of making all these friends is that occasionally they call in favours, and that might be in the form of being a mentor for the graduate program in scientific leadership, or it might be assisting with the evaluation of an MSTC or a major science and technology centre, or it might be attending various meetings, symposia and conferences, and it could be involved things like being asked to speak today. So thanks, friends. My presentation will be unashamedly focused upon Navy and its interdependency with DST, but by extension that goes to industry and to academia. I hope, nonetheless, with that Navy focus, it's still of interest to all. I'll start up by talking of the vision and mission that we've sort of set for ourselves in Navy Capability Division. I'll then go through our priorities, as articulated by Admiral Quinn, our imperatives as we see them, the opportunities that the future holds for us, and the challenges that we have in delivering against the government's agenda. And I'll talk about the need for S&T support to Navy, and finally give some examples of current collaboration that I'm aware of between Navy, industry and academia. And with a bit of luck, Jamie, I'll finish on time and we get a question in or two. So, this is the extent of my technology knowledge. We hear a lot about the Royal Australian Air Force becoming a fifth-generation Air Force, perhaps the first in the world. But the reality is that we're undergoing a similar transformation within Navy, and in fact a similar transformation is occurring across the entire joint force. Our vision reflects that Navy is an element of that joint force, and having a division head in Admiral Quinn, who was previously the head of Joint Capability Management and Integration, certainly helps to remind us and keep us focused on that reality. The fifth generation piece is all about the collection, analysis, use and dissemination of information, and for that reason we're refocusing some of our efforts towards information warfare, and there is a similar focus and change of emphasis at the fleet level. We can no longer neatly separate projects that deliver communications, cyber, EW, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities. We have to really think in terms of the information effects that we seek to generate and those that an adversary may seek to employ against us or to deny us. The mission, I hope, is self-explanatory. Under the Capability Life Cycle model, which was implemented after the first principles review, we retain the capability sponsorship role right from project inception through to the period of in-service, and in fact all the way through to disposal. We've adapted new structures and processes in Navy in 2016, and our success in sponsoring some of the major equipment decisions through to government approval, and I talk of the offshore patrol vessel, the future submarine and the Hunter-class frigates, they sort of suggest to us that our processes and the way we're doing things are pretty sound. But getting those approvals was one thing. There's a lot more we need to do to translate that into delivery. The Defence White Paper 2016 and the associated Integrated Investment Program announced the largest recapitalisation of Navy since World War II, and we heard the Minister speak about the extent of that yesterday in his presentation. Our divisional restructure, our processes and Admiral Quinn's priorities are all focused on delivering the program as directed by government. Now, the continuous shipbuilding program is at the core of the future Navy, but it's not the entirety of it. In its entirety, delivering the force outlined in the White Paper and the IIP is undoubtedly expensive. It's truly daunting in its breadth and its complexity, and it will require the coordinated efforts of Navy, of DST, the rest of Defence, and industry and academia to be successful. Now, we in Navy, we're not in the business of stimulating jobs and growth. That's the role of government. But we are in the business of providing capabilities to the warfighter, and that will give them the capabilities that they will need in the future. Now, if anyone has read the former Chief of Navy, Vice Admiral Barrett's book, Navy and a Nation, I think he has about 2,000 or 3,000 copies left if you haven't, you'll know that the document describes in really clear terms the need for capable, lethal, agile and resilient maritime capabilities. Now, Admiral Barrett repeatedly drew upon what he wrote in that book when he spoke of the essential linkages between deterrence, lethality, availability, sustainability and affordability. Now, for those who haven't heard him speak, the logic follows like this, in a much more simple form than Tim would have articulated it. Basically, if you can't demonstrate lethality, you can't achieve the deterrent effect which the government wants from its defence force. And you can't achieve lethality if your ships and your submarines aren't available. And you can't achieve availability if your platforms can't be sustained. And you can't achieve that sustainability unless the upkeep, the maintenance and the operating costs of the platforms you have are affordable. And that's got linkages in defence. It also extends obviously to the industry side of that as well. But what it means is we need to talk about capability or think about capability in a holistic manner. A key element of the revised capability life cycle I mentioned before was the reinvigoration of the way we manage FIC, or the fundamental inputs to capability. Now, this includes, as the Minister again mentioned yesterday, the inclusion of industry as this ninth FIC. Now, FIC was originally a preparedness term rather than a capability management term. I know that's in my past life I was a preparedness zealot. But really, FIC is just a way of ensuring the delivery, operation and support of a realised capability, not simply the delivery of a platform. More effective FIC coordination through the process of integrated project teams, revised governance arrangements, they're really already demonstrating an improved capability outcome, which is what we hoped for. Now, when I described our division's vision, I mentioned the importance of information. We need to improve and expand upon our recent initiatives in IW, in cyber, and we need to bring autonomous systems into the fleet. An activity in conjunction with DST, in fact led by DST, is Autonomous Warrior 18. And that will investigate the application of these unmanned and autonomous systems into the maritime domain, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. When I get to my imperatives, I'll touch upon the lengthy transition between the current and the future fleets, notably in terms of frigates and submarines. Now, the first frigate won't enter service until about the late 2020s, 27, 29, thereabouts, and the first submarine not until the early 2030s. So clearly we have to remain focused on keeping the current ships and submarines operationally available and relevant throughout their extensive remaining lives. Now, I'll talk more about the benefits of continuous shipbuilding and also the decision made last year around surface ship combat management systems. But I'll do that in the opportunities area, because it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do things better in the way we manage things. Now, the final bullet on this slide points to the need for us to work with DST, with industry and academia to develop new technology and capabilities, including through the innovation program, which was touched upon yesterday and Alex mentioned again this morning. So, imperatives. Well, clearly we have to deliver. As I said, although we've obtained the government approval for those big shipbuilding projects, we're now moving to what is arguably the more difficult phase, which is the delivery. And we have to deliver capabilities that are integrated into the broader Defence Joint Force. And we need capabilities that are designed, built, and can be operated in a way that's cognizant of the previous shortcomings in naval engineering and maintenance support. The seaworthiness regime and the culture that we've worked hard to implement after the Britso review and reforms of about 2011-2012, they really must be embedded and become such that that is business as usual for the way we conduct ourselves. Now, that delivery has to be on time and it has to be on budget. The revised CLC model and the reforms in the Capability Acquisition and Sustainment Group, they're all about focusing on effective delivery. But we'll need to be really disciplined in our delivery, for simply there is no more money, and I'll touch that a bit later as well. Now, we've hitherto delivered capability on a project-by-project basis, and this is really inefficient in terms of development and delivery. It also induces the risks that you're going to be left with a bunch of disconnected and fragmented capabilities. So the CLC model sort of drives us towards a more program approach, where projects are grouped, planned, phased and introduced in a coordinated manner. But even programs aren't the ideal solution. Where appropriate, we're going to be approaching things on a domain or an enterprise level. An example is the Combat Management System Enterprise, which was announced by the government last year. I'll mention a bit more about that later. But the way we consider things like guided weapons as well will be another area we need to revise and look at it on a more enterprise basis. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the delivery of capability is not limited to the new platforms of the continuous shipbuilding program. There are really long transition periods for each of the major capabilities. Life extension programs will be required to keep the current platforms operating effectively till the end of their lives, and capability assurance programs will be required to ensure they are actually operationally relevant until that time. In the case of the transition between the Anzac and the Hunter-class frigates, that transition goes from about 2027 through until 2043. So the oldest Anzac frigate will be about 36 years old when she's finally decommissioned. That's going to present some major challenges to us, to industry, supported by DST, and how we actually achieve that. For the older members of the audience, our old aircraft carrier Melbourne was retired after 27 years service, and people thought she was a relic and a museum piece by the time she was retired. Our 36-year Anzacs are going to be an interesting challenge for us. The submarine transition will be similarly protracted, and it's complicated by the fact we're not just replacing on a one-for-one basis, we're doubling the number of submarines, but we're more than doubling, probably 3 to 4 times increasing the size of the submarine workforce to operate that capability. That's a challenge for us. And as I said, we need to bring those new and enhanced and emerging capabilities into the fleet. There's a couple of them listed on the slide, but there'll be more. In the case of autonomous and unmanned systems, we're all too aware that we haven't got much in the way of fielded operational capability, other than some relatively simple systems operated by the mine warfare community and for the conduct of rapid environmental assessment. Now, in your latest copy of the ADM, which is in the show bag that you got when you arrived at Syndicate, on page 28, there's actually not a bad little article on the current use of Navy unmanned and autonomous systems, and it talks about the upcoming activity, Autonomous Warrior 18. So, what are our opportunities? Well, certainly the certainty that the Naval Shipbuilding Plan provides us all is unprecedented, and it gives us the basis for putting in place effective and efficient structures, processes and procedures. We know that within Navy we have to evolve. Now, last year my branch pulled together our first piece of analysis in a relatively simple document, the operationalisation of the Naval Shipbuilding Plan. Now this, if you read through this, it doesn't provide you the answer, but it certainly provides us a pathway to discover the answers as we go forward. Now, there's a range of other plans being implemented across Defence regarding shipbuilding, exports, industry capability and sovereign industry capability. Again, the Minister touched upon this range of plans that have been put in place in his presentation yesterday. We're going to need to evolve all those plans as we progress down this journey together, and it will be a long-term journey. Continuous shipbuilding is not just the 3 announced projects, it is doing this in perpetuity. The certainty of shipbuilding and the government's decision last year on the combat management systems for the surface fleet again provide opportunities to implement much better arrangements for developing, introducing and supporting these critical systems. We are working with CASG, who are reorganising their structures as well, DST and industry to design and implement what is known as this CMSE, or Combat Management System Enterprise. And while it will start with combat management systems, that enterprise will grow to cover the broader elements of the ship's overall combat system. Now, batching is the way we're going to deliver the new projects, the new shipbuilding projects. And it is a way of ensuring that we can evolve those platforms in service to mitigate obsolescence and to address changes in our operational environment and to exploit and to take notice of evolving threats. My apologies. But each batch of ship will see the amount of Australian design and content increase as we move towards a truly sovereign shipbuilding capability. Now, S&T, the government's announced and committed significant funding to the defence innovation initiatives, and they've been spoken about, the NGTF and also the Innovation Hub. It's beholden on Navy to really exploit the opportunities that can be realised through these schemes, and we've already sponsored a number of exciting projects through the Innovation Hub, and we're engaged closely with the works that are being progressed under the NGTF. And of course, our success in introducing and ultimately operating any new capabilities will be dependent upon our ability to become truly a smart buyer and a smart operator. And DST is our really key partner in helping us to achieve it, this smart buyer, smart owner. And I'll talk more about that a little later. So if there are opportunities, what are our challenges? I've noted the positive aspects of a continuous shipbuilding and our need to adapt. A simple example of our need to adapt is the acceptance of capability into service. We've learned a great deal in the last few years as we've accepted HMAS Choules, the two LHD, the large amphibious ships, and we're currently going through the introduction of the air warfare destroyers. We'll continue to refine our procedures as we bring into service the two new replenishment ships in the early 2020s. But the reality is, from about that 2020 date, we're going to be accepting a new platform, be it a ship or a submarine, every year, forever. So we need to establish what is the optimum model to do that, and how will we consider test, evaluation, acceptance, and how do we do that in a batch build model? And we don't have a lot of time to get the model right. I briefly mentioned the need for agility earlier in my presentation. I'd just like to reiterate that need here and to point at the second sub-bullet, which is what I'd like to briefly concentrate on. We've been progressing a MOTS and COTS approach to capability now for some time, and we've realised real efficiencies through it. Again, the benefit of defence from leveraging off technology developed in other fields was discussed again yesterday. But will this still be as valid as we go forward and seek to counter rapidly changing and diverse threats, and we seek to achieve operational advantage? Perhaps, as the slide suggests, we'll need to sponsor the development of certain niche capabilities indigenously. And all our capability aspirations have to be grounded in certain realities and constraints, and the first of those is dollars. Despite the increase in the defence budget, despite the increase in funding allocated to the Integrated Investment Program of 2016, the reality is that program is under significant pressure. Changed circumstances, new requirements, matured or refined costings for individual projects have combined to not only consume any fat that might have been in that program, but also to force us to make some pretty hard decisions in the next couple of years about how we deliver the intent of the government's white paper. The message from the Investment Committee, relayed down through our Chief of Navy, is a simple one. There is no more money. So whenever we have a project budget increase or we have a great new initiative we want to implement, we've got to fund that from offsets that we find within the maritime domain or the maritime program. The second constraint is people. Navy recently grew to 14,000 people, the first time we've reached that figure in over 18 months. But that means we're still about 600 to 800 people short of what our authorised strength is. And our authorised strength will grow over the next few years as we are expected to bring on board these new capabilities. That's going to be a real challenge for us. Simply, we need to grow our Navy through improved recruitment, and through improved retention. But we have to do this at the same time that industry is gearing up to deliver the range of capabilities that we need. What the nation can ill afford is a free-for-all competition for the available talent. Both Navy and industry will need to grow their workforces, but will need to do it in a smarter way and in a more collaborative way than perhaps we've managed to do it in the past. So, I've mentioned S&T and collaboration a number of times already, but perhaps it's a bit naughty of me that I don't actually put a slide up with S&T in the heading until slide number 6. But we acknowledge that DST is absolutely key to helping us to exploit our future opportunities and work through some of the challenges that I identified on the earlier slides. They help us in the early concept exploration and the concept development stage. They provide key support to our projects as they work through the approval stages, and ultimately they help to support us operate the capabilities when they are in service. But a relatively small DST can't possibly build and maintain a depth of knowledge and expertise across all the defence S&T related disciplines, and that was articulated by Alex quite clearly in his opening comments. Hence, it's not just desirable, but it's absolutely essential that DST develop and sustain mutually productive relationships and collaborations with industry and with academia. The slide shows some of the mechanisms for partnering, but really that's the business, the how is the business of DST. I can only stress as an ADF warfighter the absolute need for them to do those partnerships. So what are some collaboration examples? I thought I'd cover this slide by highlighting some of the current areas of collaboration that I'm aware of, in part to show what is being achieved, but also in the hope of encouraging further collaboration efforts. I highlighted the need to accelerate introduction of autonomous systems into our fleet, and we're engaged closely with the Trusted Autonomous Systems CRC, which we heard earlier is a recent construct under the NGTF. I also mentioned Autonomous Warrior. And now, for those who aren't aware, this is a really significant activity involving Australian and overseas industry, defence, DST and their international S&T partners. Focused on Jervis Bay in November, it builds on previous activities conducted overseas, the most recent being in the United Kingdom last year. As I say, there's a brief mention of it in that ADM article, so to whet your appetite. Now, Australia is leading in active phased array and multifunction aperture technology through efforts by CEA, RMIT and the University of Melbourne. Again, Alex mentioned briefly about CEA. And the case of CEA is an interesting one. For in the early years, when we were looking to sponsor that work, there were plenty of voices in DSTO who questioned the validity of the technology that was being pursued. And those critical voices were really essential to us in defence to being able to make the informed decisions, understanding the risks of proceeding down that capability path. So even though they weren't fully committed in terms of support, that questioning the underpinning sciences was really critical to allowing us to make good decisions. Now, CEA, and now supported by DST, their capabilities are really benefiting Navy. They were introduced into service in the Anzac class when we upgraded under what was known as the Anti-Ship Missile Defence Upgrade. The technology continues to evolve and new variants are about to be inserted into the Anzacs. It's also going to be the core radar system of the future frigate, the Hunter class, and it will likely fill other roles across defence. Now, submarine construction and maintenance is really highly specialised work, and DST has worked with ASC and industry throughout the life from construction and in service of the Collins class, and they'll continue to do so through into the life of type. And no doubt similar support will be provided to Naval Group, the previous DCNS, as they embark upon the build of the future submarine. I've spoken, as have others, about the Innovation Hub earlier on. We're really excited about some of the recent proposals, and I've put one up there, which is work on submarine exhaust suppression, which is being progressed by DST and by Adelaide Uni, but there are other programs as well. BSAP's a terrible acronym for the Broadband Spherion Acoustic Processing System, which is for the sonars on the Anzac class, and the associated panorama display system. They're a really interesting example of how some DST research, in-house research, was then picked up under what was known as a Capability Technology Demonstrator, which was the old innovation ecosystem. It was then eventually matured to a level that could be taken on by Thales as the industry partner and provided to both our Navy and to New Zealand as a viable technology solution. As an old ASW officer, I was pretty excited by what BSAPS and Panorama offered, but I was absolutely astounded and somewhat overwhelmed by what has been achieved in terms of laser fibre optics and its application in towed array sonars. I don't know if Scott Foster's here, but he once gave me a presentation that I think I got about every third word, but it's truly groundbreaking science and it's very impressive, and that's another good example of collaboration between DST, the academia, and ultimately Thales again as the industry partner who's bringing that to a actually realised capability. And the final two dot points just show that collaboration in the sciences is not limited to the physical equipment and the hardware. So human factors and physiology work with the University of Wollongong, cyber research and application with Data 61 show a glimpse of what else is possible. So, my aim was to highlight Navy's current capability vision, our priorities, what we saw as our imperatives, our opportunities and our challenges, and to give a hint as how DST, industry and academia can help us to achieve what C.N. Barrett in his book described as a national endeavour. Jamie, I think I'm 5 minutes in the black, which means we have time for questions.
You do have...
And I do want to thank you. Okay. I do want to thank you for your support of DST. I was in the graduate program for scientific leadership, and you were challenging me on how DSTO is going to change. And I hope after 5 years you can see some change here. I guess you talked about wanting to see further engagement with academics. My network is working with the university partners. I wondered if you could give us some ideas on how you see success with furthering partnerships with universities. Sure.
So the reality is, I think Alex articulated pretty well, we haven't got a monopoly in DST on all the smart people and all the smart ideas. So ideas are going to be generated by technologists and by future thinkers, largely who are resident in the university and academic sector. So that's where some of these good ideas will spring up for. If you've got effective partnerships with them, you'll be able to spot those opportunities to encourage the development of those ideas, develop them into something which could be mutually useful. And that can only be done by a continuing engagement and exchange of ideas. And then they can be picked up by one of the numerous partnership models that Alex spoke about earlier. And that might eventually lead to a pull-through from maybe an NGTF, move that into the innovation hub space. And that's something we haven't spoken about the last 2 days, and we haven't had an example yet of something being pulled through from NGTF to the hub space, but that's eventually what we seek to do as we take from the initial good idea of fundamental research, a good idea, pulled into something that gets a bit of substance under the NGTF, gets pulled through into the hub to something which starts to look like maybe a prototype, and then that partnership with industry, someone saying, I'm going to run with that, that's worth commercialising, there's a market there or a real defence need, and we'll take it to market and build it. That's success. If you get from the good idea of someone in the university, eventually we get it on the deck plates of a ship and use it operationally. That's real success. But I think the model you've gone on, this journey you've been on DST and I've been watching it for the last 5 or 6 years, is really reinvigorating that outreach and that engagement. I certainly think you're on the right path.
Travis Reddy from Defentex.
Yep.
Just identify for me where you think the early opportunities for autonomy are within the fleet.
Yeah, sure. So I think where we started sort of makes sense in that mine warfare and rapid environmental assessment area. Mine warfare makes eminent sense. Dangerous, hazardous environment. Previously done with divers sticking their fingers out, then advanced to divers with handheld sonars and other devices. Sticking an autonomous and unmanned system into that water column in the presence of mines and other hazards, because let's be honest, mines often have other hazards, so that's a great first environment to do it. Environmental assessment, so the old surveying processes, the fact that we can now cover survey grounds far quicker and more efficiently using unmanned systems rather than just using manned platforms and boats, that's a real simple one. You extend both those things to advanced force operations for amphibious work. Again, instead of putting humans into the surf zone in advanced force operations before an amphibious landing, if you can do that through unmanned or autonomous systems, that's clearly a smart thing to do. It's also a more effective thing to do. You move that out into the different domains. So anti-submarine warfare, which is sort of my background, the ability to put unmanned sensors into the water column, whether they be sensors sitting behind and underneath a surface vessel. We've got a couple of hub proposals which are doing that, or whether it's gliders or other sort of underwater vehicles. Again, we have hub proposals that are looking at that with sensors being deployed from unmanned undersea vessels. That makes sense for us. And then you look at in terms of the air domain, so the same attractions, the reasons we're putting unmanned aerial vehicles into service with the Army and with the Air Force makes sense for us. So we have a program, Project C129 Phase 5, which is about unmanned aerial vehicles initially for the offshore patrol vessel, and then migrating that to the major surface combatants makes sense as well. So we're ripe to exploit this technology. We've just been a bit slow, to be honest, to adapt to it and to incorporate it.
So, Phil, that was tremendous. Actually, I've got to say that was very much you brought almost a tear to my eye in terms of the fact that this is really a one defence presentation where you can see the alignment between what the ADF and the Navy is seeking to achieve with our S&T mission, and it's great to see how we're clearly working very closely together. We're aware of your needs, you're aware of our capabilities, and we're actually building a program which is actually going to deliver a game changer. I think, if I'm right, is it 58 vessels we've agreed to build?
Yeah, that.
Yeah, so that's extraordinary when you think about 58 vessels, and how many we build in the last 20 is like half a dozen.
At the most.
Yeah, that's right. So it's just, and that means really this cooperative program that Philip talked about is essential. And you guys are great partners, and we really do appreciate your leadership, Philip.
Thanks.
You've been tremendous and a great partner to us, and let's keep up the great work.
Thanks, Alex.
And a small memento of today.
Brilliant. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Please join. Thank you, Philip.